There arrives a moment in every person's evolution when acceptance becomes insufficient, when being picked is no longer the prize you seek. Because you weren't created to be someone's fallback, their second thought, or a background character in their narrative. You were designed to be treasured, to become magnetic not through performance or ego, but through an unshakable force called authenticity. Perhaps you've existed as someone who catered to others' desires, constantly striving to be pleasant enough, suitable enough. But the season has come when you can no longer survive as a watered-down edition of yourself. You must emerge as the authentic, irreplaceable original, not because you demand recognition, but because you possess something precious that this world desperately needs. True luxury isn't about money, it's about value. It doesn't live in the cost you assign, but in the vibrational essence you emit through your being. A pearl doesn't announce its worth, it radiates quietly, and every eye discovers it. Today, I want to share the fundamental keys of metamorphosis, keys forged through psychology, ancient wisdom, and the deepest truths of human experience, so you can stop existing as a choice and begin living as an invaluable treasure. Because within every human spirit lies a wordless longing not merely to survive, but to exist with purpose. Beyond the daily routines, behind the reflection that shows your features, there exists an identity that remains unnamed, untouched, waiting for you to acknowledge and celebrate it. This identity isn't built from pride or hunger for achievement, but from narrative, meaning, and essence. It doesn't speak the language of trends, titles, or accomplishment. It communicates through the silent energy flowing through your gaze, your movements, and your stillness. Key 1, discover your sacred blueprint. We aren't born into emptiness, we're born into legend. Not the kind found in literature, but the kind written into our DNA. Some are destined to be the creator, the one who finds wonder where others see only function. Some are the fighter, the one who stands each time existence knocks them down. Some are the transformer, the one who converts suffering into understanding. And some are the leader who guides not through dominance, but through the weight of their inner universe. These aren't masks to wear, they are realities to be completely embodied. Yet most people navigate life unaware that they're following someone else's blueprint. They collect fragments of identity from relatives, culture, or anxiety. They adopt assigned roles and wonder why they feel transparent, forgettable, and easily replaced. If you want to become a symbol, not just an option, you must begin here with the bravest act of all, remembering yourself. Ask yourself without hesitation, without avoidance, who am I when I no longer carry my name? When no one is watching, what kind of energy do you embody? When do you feel most real, most powerful, most undeniable? This is not a question about preferences. This is a question about presence. When all your defenses fall, the energy that remains, that is your soul's signature. And that is the beginning of your archetype. Take Maria's journey as proof. She worked as an interior designer, skilled, committed, but invisible. Clients appreciated her results, but nobody recalled her name. Until one afternoon in Florence, she encountered the statue of the Muse of Inspiration, Terpsichore. Something ancient stirred within her, like a formless breeze of voiceless recognition. She wept, not from sorrow, but because she understood she wasn't merely someone who arranged objects. She was the Muse herself, the spirit that awakens hidden beauty. From that revelation, she stopped positioning herself as budget-friendly. She quit competing in a market saturated with identical offerings and bland promises. She began speaking the language of transformation. Her brand, her presence, her words, her worth, everything evolved, not because she became someone different, but because she remembered who she was. And from that moment, she no longer sold a service. She offered an energetic transformation. Her clients changed, her income changed, but the most important shift was that she changed. This is not a story about personal branding. This is a story about identity. You cannot expect others to revere you if you have never revered the sacred within yourself. People don't pay a premium for features. They pay for feelings. And those feelings must begin inside you. But let's be honest. Calling out your archetype is not a gentle process. It's a journey of burning away false selves you've built for years. It requires you to look into the mirror, unfiltered, unapologetic, free from the need to be accepted. It forces you to ask, what truth am I here to live fully, even if the world does not yet understand it? But the reward is priceless. When you name your archetype, your energy becomes sharper. And in a world drowning in vagueness, clarity is luxury. The sovereign does not need to prove their worth. They simply show up. The transformer does not explain. They change and others feel it. The creator does not chase affection. They become a mirror in which others see themselves and love again. When you live your archetype, everything begins to align. Your boundaries become clearer. Your presence becomes more magnetic. Your decisions are no longer driven by anxiety, but by clarity. You no longer compete in a chaotic marketplace of choices because you are no longer a choice. You are a distinct identity. But be prepared. Some will resist your transformation. They will say you've changed, that you're too different, too intense. Let them speak. That is the voice of the old world, trying to pull you back into the smallness they feel comfortable with. Do not shrink to soothe someone else's insecurity. You were not born to blend in. You were born to reveal something rare, something they didn't know they were longing for until you arrived and helped them see. So begin. Study yourself like you would read sacred scripture. Observe the patterns that have repeated throughout your life, the moments when you lit up, the symbols that keep returning. Maybe you are a healer. Maybe you are someone who turns chaos into beauty. Maybe you are the peace that makes others feel they can finally breathe. Whoever you are, you must begin with one thing: remembering yourself. B2. Master the art of strategic distance. There comes a point in life, whether you're ready or not, that arrives like a calling you can no longer ignore. A calling that doesn't speak in sound, but hums quietly within you through sleepless nights, through moments when you're surrounded by people, yet feel invisible. That is when you begin to feel it. Being chosen, being accepted, being needed is no longer enough, because deep inside you know you weren't born just to be chosen. You were born to be revered. And that difference between being chosen and being revered is the first turning point on your path of transformation. You see, living as an option, a backup plan, is like living in a story where you only play a supporting role. You're present but not central. You're remembered but never essential. There exists a quiet yet profound principle in human psychology, older than any civilization and deeper than any doctrine. What withdraws with intention creates a longing that cannot be dismissed. Not because it manipulates, but because it understands that space has power. We often believe that to be valued, to be remembered, we must always be available, enthusiastic, responsive, constantly present when others need us. But the more unconditionally accessible we become, the more we're taken for granted. What's taken for granted is rarely treasured. Conversely, what disappears occasionally, not to control but to honor itself, becomes something others cannot stop considering. Distance, when practiced intentionally and from a centered place, doesn't break connection. It intensifies the yearning for it. When you're no longer always available, people begin to listen more, appreciate more, wonder more. And it is within that wondering, the space you leave behind, that true longing is born. Don't confuse this with games. This is deeply rooted psychological architecture embedded in our collective consciousness. When someone is always present, always accommodating, always giving without pause, they don't just exhaust themselves, they accidentally devalue their presence. The receiver starts to perceive them as default, like a lamp in the corner, so familiar that no one notices it anymore. But when that lamp goes out, the whole room shifts. And in that moment, people finally realize that light wasn't just there, it was a gift they had forgotten. So, if you're on the path to becoming an irreplaceable presence, you must learn a skill that no school teaches: the art of intentional withdrawal. You don't need to be angry or dramatic. You just need to quietly pull your energy back from places that no longer know how to honor it. You don't need to make a scene. You don't need to announce it. You don't need to make anyone feel guilty. You simply choose absence as an act of self-respect. Like how a rare perfume is kept behind glass, not easily accessed, not readily touched. You can't sample it at will. But because of that protection, you begin to wonder, what does it smell like? Is it worth it? Why is it so precious that it needs safeguarding? From that curiosity, imagination, and desire awaken. You don't need to prove anything. Your selective presence already speaks for you. In a world obsessed with speed and instant access, your ability to maintain sacred space is a countercultural act, but also the very thing that makes you unforgettable. Not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you know how to preserve your wholeness, refusing to pour your energy into meaningless calls, filler messages, or conversations held only to prove that you still exist in someone's mind. And you know what? Not everyone will handle that distance well. Some will get angry. Some will go silent. Some will say, "You've changed," and they'll be right. You've become emotionally expensive, no longer free of cost, not because you've grown arrogant, but because you've come to understand this: presence is a privilege, not an obligation. This doesn't mean you close yourself off or become cold. In truth, this is when you become warm in a deliberate way. You offer your presence with mindfulness. You don't speak excessively, but every word carries meaning. You're not always there, but when you do show up, others feel something deeper, as if your calm helps them hear their own inner voice. And the most important part, you no longer act out of fear of being forgotten. You begin to act from inner fullness. From that place, you don't need to shout to be noticed. You don't need to chase to be kept. You don't need to always be present to maintain your place, because you've understood that true value takes time to be felt, and intentional absence is the birthplace of reverence. Perhaps you once believed you had to be accessible, convenient, always available in order to be loved. But it is precisely that belief that cast you into the role of the one chosen when no one else is left. Choose to step back, not as punishment, but as an act of self-honoring. Because what is not easily touched stirs true desire. Try it. Don't be the one to initiate the next conversation where you're always the first to reach out. Let silence be present. Let others miss you. Let your absence become the way they finally feel you, not through your words, but through the space you leave behind. And if someone truly cares, they won't disappear. They will return with a new mindset, a new appreciation, and a deeper frequency of connection. Because in the end, you weren't born to be accessible at all times. You were born to be awaited, to be sought after, to be named with longing, not out of need, but from a profound realization that you are like no one else. And to lose you is to lose something that cannot be repeated. D3, become emotionally expensive. There's a kind of person you cannot forget, not because they do too much, speak excessively, or try to impress, but because every time you leave them, you feel as though you've just touched something deeply authentic, rare, and difficult to define. They leave a quiet space that chaos cannot fill. They make you want to return, not to be entertained, but to be heard, felt, and reconnected with the deepest part of yourself. They may not be the most noticeable, but they are utterly unforgettable. These are the emotionally expensive people. And the beautiful truth is you can become one too. But before the world sees you as a precious presence, you must first feel that way about yourself. Becoming emotionally expensive doesn't start with being distant or crafting mystery. It's not a tactic. It's the natural result of inner refinement. When you've sat long enough with your own pain, You no longer react impulsively. You respond with understanding. When you've faced solitude completely, you stop fearing absence. You learn to be selectively present. And when you've moved beyond versions of yourself that lived only for approval, you begin living as an independent, deep-rooted being. Unshakable, unreachable by impulse, and irreplaceable. You become emotionally expensive not because you control others, but because you've learned to master yourself. You no longer fragment your presence to please everyone. You no longer give your attention, your guidance, your time, your energy to shallow exchanges. You know how to decline without guilt. You withdraw from spaces where you feel you have to strain just to be loved, and remain only where you can relax and still be honored. Others begin to sense this. They can't name it, but they feel it. They enter a space you occupy and notice the energy shift, as if the room's frequency just recalibrated. They don't say it aloud, but they listen more intently. They choose their words more carefully. They don't brush past your presence like you're easygoing, because in you is a profound stillness, not the kind that retreats, but the kind that carries weight. And when you speak, every word lands with the resonance of someone who has understood before they ever open their mouth. Being emotionally expensive doesn't mean becoming distant. In fact, you might be warmer than ever, but it's a warmth with depth, with boundaries, with intention. You know your presence has the power to heal, to inspire, to make others feel seen, heard, and reminded that they still have a soul. And because you know this, you don't give it away carelessly. You offer it with awareness, with a heart that no longer needs to prove itself, only to live in truth. You no longer let people drift in and out of your life like a train station. You become a sacred space. Not open to everyone, but for those who are invited, it feels like a gift. And the magic is, you don't have to explain your standards. Your energy sets them. You don't need to justify why you no longer reply instantly. You don't need to apologize for your silence when there's no need to speak, because you know every time you speak, you leave an imprint. And that imprint cannot be erased by the fast-paced consumption of this era. Today's world is thirsty not for more information, but for more real presence. We scroll past each other, past ourselves, exchanging energy without weight. And in that context, a person with depth, direction, and self-possession becomes like water in a desert. So rare, people can't help but pause. They can't leave without remembering. They can't meet you without asking themselves, why do I feel more at peace when this person is here? Being emotionally expensive also means you won't be for everyone. Some will see you as hard to read, too intense, or not fun enough. And that's perfectly okay, because you're not here to be liked by the masses. You're here for the right ones. Those tuned to your frequency, those also seeking truth. They won't need your explanation. They'll feel you in the way only soul recognizes soul. Think of the people who once moved you, not because of what they said, but because of how they showed up. They didn't need to be magnetic. They only needed to be honest in their energy. And you can be that too. But to become it, you must learn to be alone without feeling empty, to preserve your energy instead of scattering it, to be silent yet whole. And slowly you'll realize you've become the place others long to return to, not to escape the world, but to remember themselves. So start with the smallest things. Don't respond until your heart is ready. Choose your words more deliberately. Hold your silence when your voice adds no value. Ask yourself, do I really want to give this, or am I just afraid of being forgotten? From there, each small decision begins to shape a new frequency within you, the frequency of someone who cannot be replaced, skimmed, or consumed easily. Because in the end, what we truly seek is not someone who's always available, but someone whose presence, every time it appears, awakens something inside us. And you can become that person, not by effort, but by enriching your inner world until your presence becomes an experience that cannot be replicated. Key 4, cultivate inner wealth. There is a kind of silence that isn't hollow, but rich. a kind of peace that doesn't come from avoiding the world, but from having made peace with yourself. And there is a kind of luxury that doesn't manifest in clothes, cars, or status, but radiates from within, from a place you've quietly cultivated for years, unseen and unnoticed, yet felt by everyone who meets you. This is inner wealth, not for display, but for living with steadiness and depth. You don't enrich your inner world to be admired by others. You do it because you understand your inner world is the foundation of everything you offer outward. We live in an era where knowing more is praised, yet understanding oneself is often overlooked. People talk about success, strategies, soft skills, but few ask, where is your inner self in all of this? They forget that if the roots are rutting, no matter how lush the leaves, the tree will fall in a gentle breeze. And that collapse doesn't come from a lack of skill, but from a lack of inner solidity. Inner wealth doesn't begin by consuming every self-improvement book or attending endless retreats. It begins with radical honesty, when you can sit with yourself, not performing anything, simply listening to all the unnamed emotions, the wounds you concealed, the dreams you abandoned, the parts of you you rejected because someone once said they weren't acceptable. When you are brave enough to sit with all of it without analyzing or fixing, that's when the real enrichment begins. You cannot build a rich inner life if you're still running from your shadows. If you chase only positivity while denying sadness, you're living half a life, and a half-lived life can never offer a whole presence. To enrich your inner world is to embrace your darkness with tenderness, not to let it consume you, but to let it become the foundation of your compassion. Truly deep people aren't always joyful or gentle. They are the ones who've walked through shadows and chosen not to be defined by them while never denying them. From that reconciliation, you begin to lay the foundation of steadiness. Not a concrete foundation of sheer willpower, but a soft yet enduring ground made of self-understanding. You begin to know when to speak and when to remain silent, when to hold back and when to give. Every choice becomes lighter, not because it's easy, but because fear no longer dictates it. You act not to prove, but to express, not to perform, but to reveal truth. And then you'll realize when your inner world is rich, you don't need to say much to be trusted. Others feel they can lean on you even when you make no promises. They feel your full presence even if you're just listening. They know you're not there to please. You're there to be real, and that is so rare. They can't walk away lightly. Inner richness doesn't make you superior. It makes you consciously humble. You don't need to always be right, but you are always sincere. You don't need grand words, but the ones you do say feel distilled through time. Your silences are not voids. They are spacious enough for others to hear themselves more clearly. And that is the harmony the world longs for. Someone who doesn't strive to conquer, yet makes everyone want to listen. But remember, this richness doesn't come from playing the deep person. It only comes when you truly walk your own journey slowly, without force, without hurry. You read, not to say you've read, but to let each page mark you like a meaningful encounter. You journal, not to create a beautiful notebook, but to face yourself without judgment. You sit in silence, not to meditate successfully, but to simply return to your breath. And slowly you'll start to see a subtle yet powerful shift. Everything you touch begins to carry your energy, not because you impose it, but because every expression becomes an extension of your inner wealth. A short blessing warms someone's heart. A glance makes someone feel seen. A quiet withdrawal gives others something to reflect on. You no longer need to try to influence. You are the influence, not by effort, but because you've truly lived your depth. You will also begin to see when your inner world is rich enough, you're no longer easily wounded by careless words, unconscious reactions, or others' silence. Not because you're numb, but because you no longer let the outside world dictate your inner weather. You know who you are. And that knowing doesn't come from grades, titles, or recognition. It comes from the quiet hours you've spent tending to your roots. The world doesn't need more people who know how to impress. It needs more people who live with soul, with grounding, with substance. People who just by entering a room bring stillness, make the air easier to breathe, make conversations more honest, and bring others closer to their own hearts. You can be that person, not by putting on a show, just by continuing to enrich your inner world patiently, quietly, sincerely. Because one day when someone asks, "Why do you have this presence?" you'll smile. Not because you have the answer, but because you know what's truly deep doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be fully lived. Key 5, transform your language. In a world saturated with noise and words spoken from habit, there's something seemingly simple that transforms every interaction. The way you use language. Not just vocabulary, grammar, or sentence length, but the frequency that accompanies each word you speak. It's the vibration others feel after your words, even if they can't explain why. Some people say very little, but every sentence they utter lands like it touched someone's soul. Others speak constantly, yet leave nothing behind but hollow echoes. The difference lies here. Language isn't merely communication. It's the subtle expression of your inner world. Language is not just a tool. It's the space where your soul finds voice. It's the architecture of your consciousness. It's the thread that connects your inner and outer world. When you speak, you're not just sharing information. You're transmitting emotion, energy, and intention. And the world doesn't respond to your words with logic first. It responds with feeling. Think back to the last time someone said something simple, yet it made you stop. Perhaps it was, "I understand," or "I'm here," or just, "Are you okay?" But the way they said it, the tone, rhythm, gaze, presence, made those words sacred. Not because they were eloquent, but because they spoke from a place that was truly alive inside them. Their words became part of the frequency they radiated. That's why the language of truly deep people always feels different. They don't speak to fill silence. They don't use words to control space. They speak as if each word is a seed chosen carefully, planted mindfully, with the understanding that it will leave something behind in the listener, in themselves, in the atmosphere around them. They don't just communicate. They transform. If you're on the journey to becoming an irreplaceable presence, you must learn to use language like an artist uses a brush, mindfully, skillfully, and with vibrant life. You don't need fancy words. You need authenticity. And that authenticity isn't in the content, it's in the energy you place behind the words. When you say no, it must carry groundedness, not fear of rejection. When you say, "I choose this," it must come from a place lit brightly enough to distinguish what truly serves you and what does not. People with rich inner lives tend to speak less, but their words feel aged like fine wine. They don't rush to respond. They don't need to win arguments because they don't speak to assert. They speak to connect from a deeper place where even silence has its own voice. And in that stillness, their words echo further than any shout. You can start with something small. Shift the language you use with yourself. Don't say, "I have to do this." Try, "I choose to do this." Feel the difference. One is burden, one is sovereignty. One is pressure, one is power. Language doesn't just describe your world, it shapes it. And the world responds not just with circumstances, but with deeper, more aligned connections to the person you are becoming. An emotionally expensive person never says, "I'm busy" as an excuse. They say, "That doesn't align with my energy right now." They don't say, "Sorry for bothering you." They say, "Thank you for your time." Each phrase reclaims frequency, not to perform, but to live more truthfully in their own weight. And over time, their way of speaking causes others to listen more carefully, slow down, and absorb more deeply. You don't need to be a great speaker. You only need to become aware that words are extensions of your soul. And every time you speak with full presence, others will feel it. Long before they understand the content, they'll hear with their hearts, not just with their ears. So practice not to sound good, but to speak true. Pause for a moment before saying something important. Feel the frequency you're transmitting. Ask, am I saying this to prove something or to share something real? And if you're unsure, hold it back, because silence from someone with depth is still a powerful form of communication. Then you'll notice when your language begins to reflect your inner depth. Everything shifts. Old relationships may dissolve if they no longer align, but new connections, deeper, more resonant, will emerge. Not because you're better at communication, but because your words now carry light. The world doesn't lack for words, but it's starving for truth, for words that don't scream, but stay. Not decorative, but revealing. Not rushed, but unforgettable. And you can be one of the rare ones who uses language like others use, light, to reveal, to warm, to nourish. Because in the end, people won't remember exactly what you said. They'll remember how they felt after you spoke. And that feeling doesn't come from content, it comes from the place inside you where your words were born. B6, align your aesthetic. Before you speak a word, before you have a chance to reveal your depth, before someone understands what moves your heart, they see you. And that first glance, fair or not, imprints deeply in their mind. Not because they're shallow, but because that's how the mind works. It receives image before it interprets meaning. That's why appearance, in the broadest sense, is not just surface. It is the first language you speak to the world. Aesthetic is not about fashion. It is the harmony between your inner archetype and your outer expression. It's not about the price of your outfit, but whether it reflects your current frequency. It's not about the brand you wear, but the alignment between your essence and how you embody it. A plain white shirt can seem ordinary on one person, yet iconic on another, because the latter has lived deeply enough that everything they wear carries soul. We often say don't judge a book by its cover, but in reality, the mind judges before logic even arrives. Tiny details, your posture, the colors you wear, your attention to grooming, are all silent symbols sending messages. The question is, does that message match the person you are becoming? If your inner world has been cultivated, if your energy resonates on a new frequency, then your outward expression must be in sync. If not, a subtle dissonance forms, one that others unconsciously pick up on. They may feel drawn to you, yet hesitate to move closer, not because you lack value, but because your outer symbols aren't telling the same story as your inner truth. Start with your space. What does your home say about you? Does it still reflect a version of you who was lost, compromising, living for others? Do your paintings, your objects, your layout still echo someone you've outgrown? If so, don't rush to redecorate. Sit with each corner, each item. What brings you ease? What tightens your chest? Then begin curating your space as if reorganizing your soul. You don't need a perfect home. You need a space that resonates with the frequency of the self you're building. Maybe it's a chair that invites stillness, a lamp that calms you at night, a curtain that softens morning light. These small details aren't decorations. They are symbols, the tangible expression of an inner life being tended. Your wardrobe, too, is a language. You don't need to follow trends, but ask, do these colors reflect my energy? Does this style embody who I'm becoming? Some colors mute you, others make you shine. Not because they're trendy, but because they resonate with your inner archetype. If you are the healer, perhaps soft sage or creamy beige supports your essence. If you are the sovereign, perhaps deep earth tones ground you. You don't need to conform, but you do need to be sincere, even in how you choose your clothes. And finally, your very presence. Your face, your stance, your gaze. Notice, do you often rush, avoid eye contact, shrink into crowds? These don't speak of beauty, they speak of presence. A person with a full inner world walks a little slower, looks a little deeper, sits a little steadier, not because they're performing, but because they no longer need to flee. And others sense it, not through logic, but through frequency. They enter your space and feel clarity. They see how you dress and feel authenticity. They hear your voice and feel calm. You don't need to say, "I'm being real." Your symbols already speak, and they make you an experience, deep, unconsumable, irreplaceable. True aesthetic is not about extravagance. It is coherence between the within and the without. When your soul reaches stillness, your surface becomes congruent. When you love yourself enough to choose every detail with intention, the world begins to respond to your presence differently, not with superficial admiration, but with silent reverence for someone who has come into full alignment with themselves. The world doesn't need more beautiful people. It needs more people with soul-level aesthetic. Those who transform any space they touch into a place where others can breathe more easily. And you can become that person, not through recognition, but through consistency. Through living a little more truthfully each day, even in how you hang a shirt, light a lamp, or sit alone in stillness with yourself. Key 7, master intentional presence. There's something no one tells you when they advise you to live your truth, that this journey isn't comfortable. In fact, sometimes it's so challenging it makes you want to run back to old roles, to the mask that once made you feel accepted, but you can't, because once you've touched the truth, you can no longer pretend. And that's precisely why the journey to discover your archetype, the primal essence within you, demands one irreplaceable quality: courage. Not the superficial kind of courage, not impulsive decisions disguised as self-reinvention. This is the kind of courage that means staying with yourself even when the rest of the world doesn't understand, doesn't agree, even resist. It's the bravery to let go of what's no longer real, to face the mirror of your soul without makeup, without justification, without needing to be liked. It's looking straight into the deepest part of yourself and daring to ask, who am I really when I stop trying to become what others expect? The truth is, for many years, you might have built a social version of yourself, a version that's reasonable, agreeable, predictable, and easy to accept. You learned how to answer the right questions in interviews, how to smile at the right time in conversations, how to live as the perfect answer to a test called fitting in. But eventually, you begin to feel tired, not because you're weak, but because your soul can no longer survive in a structure that doesn't belong to it. That's when the archetype starts to knock quietly, unhurriedly, but just enough to make it impossible for you to feel peace in your old skin. You start feeling disconnected from what used to excite you. You feel lost in places that once made you proud. You are no longer who you were yesterday, but you don't yet know who you will be tomorrow. That in between, both chaotic and sacred, is the first sign that you're entering the journey of soul awakening. And then you realize that in order to find your archetype, you don't need to add more, you need to strip away. You don't need to create a new version of yourself. You need to wipe off the layers of dust covering your original light. You need to release the need to be understood, to be praised, to be reassured that everything will be okay. There will be days you feel like you're losing everything, but that isn't loss, it's liberation. Liberating yourself from everything that was never truly yours. This is when you must face your deepest fears. Fear of being left behind, fear of being misunderstood, fear of hearing that you've changed too much. And yes, you are changing, but not to become someone else. You're changing to return to yourself, and that's always unsettling to those who are comfortable with the predictable you. But you're not here to soothe others. You're here to illuminate your soul. This requires absolute honesty, not just with the world, but with yourself. You have to admit the places you tried to belong just because you were afraid of being alone. The decisions you made, not because they were true, but because they were safe. The relationships you clung to, not for love, but for familiarity. Your archetype cannot live in the shadows of self-deception. It only appears when you step into the light, even if it's blinding, even if no one is there to welcome you. And when the archetype begins to emerge, you'll feel something strange. You no longer need to prove anything, because your energy starts becoming tangible, no longer vague, no longer diluted, Every word you speak carries weight. Every action you take reflects a frequency that cannot be copied. You no longer need to say much to be trusted. Your silence is enough to shift the room because you're no longer living to impress. You're living to embody truth, and the world senses it. Not everyone, but those who need to will recognize it. They won't be able to explain why they're drawn to you. They'll just know that being near you feels more real, more profound, like touching something ancient inside themselves. That's when you stop being a nice person, a likable person, a good fit, and start becoming a symbol, a rare frequency, a presence that cannot be replaced. But be careful, because just as you begin to shine, there will be voices trying to pull you back. They'll come from people who were used to the old you, the one who always accommodated, who always agreed, who was always there when needed. They won't understand why you've become quieter, more selective, sharper. They'll call it selfishness, coldness, But you know the truth. You are not distancing. You are reconnecting, not with others, but with yourself. And from that place, everything begins to change. You make decisions not out of anxiety, but out of clarity. You choose relationships not from lack, but from resonance. You work not because you have to, but because you are being yourself in everything you do. Your archetype begins to speak, not through words, but through presence. And when you live fully in that energy, the world doesn't need anyone to promote you. They will feel you. That is the gift of this journey. Not instant recognition, not applause, but the deep sense of coming home within your own soul. And from that place, you are no longer an option. You are a conscious choice, not because you begged for it, but because you've become someone impossible to ignore. Key 8, embrace your sacred solitude. There is a part of you that has always been present, even before you knew how to name it. A part untouched by titles, detached from positions, unaffected by praise or the gaze of judgment. It needs no approval, no agreement, because it was never meant to be built. It was meant to be remembered. That is your archetype, the primal symbol within you, your soul's origin, the deepest identity you've carried since birth. Though you may have forgotten it when you entered this noisy, expectation-hilled world. The great psychoanalyst once said that we are not born as blank slates, but as maps already drawn, merely hidden beneath layers of dust. Archetypes are the original templates living within the collective unconscious of humanity. Symbols universally and unconsciously recognized across all cultures: the lover, the magician, the warrior, the sovereign, the healer, the guide. Each archetype carries a unique frequency, a way of being, a form of energy, a silent resonance that draws attention. And one of those archetypes is you. You don't have to create the person you want to become. You only need to find again the person you have always been. But to do so, you must strip away all the outer voices, the labels others assign to you, the role society expects from you, the layers you've worn just to appear normal. You need to return to the quietest place, not a room, but your own mind, where you can listen to yourself without being interrupted by the world's expectations. Start by observing. When do you feel most like yourself? When do you effortlessly attract others without trying to impress? When do you feel heard without needing to speak much? Those moments, however small, are traces of your archetype rising. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It flows beneath the surface, powerful yet discreet, leaving a presence that people may not name but cannot forget. Don't confuse archetype with personality or preference. Personality can shift with environments. Preferences are shaped by experiences. But an archetype is the most enduring part of you, the unchanging core, even as everything else changes. That's why someone can switch careers, relocate, or adopt a new lifestyle, yet still carry something unmistakably them. That is archetype. Some are lovers not because they're seductive or romantic, but because they see beauty where others see utility. They bring inspiration, softness, emotional connection. They don't seek love, they become love. Some are warriors not because they shout strength, but because they stand up every time they fall. Their determination isn't declared, it's felt in silent resilience. They don't need to prove they're strong. They just live as if failure was never an ending. Some are magicians who not only heal pain, but elevate it into understanding, compassion, wisdom. They don't avoid darkness, they walk into it, befriend it, and return with light. And some are sovereigns, not defined by power, but by gravity. When they're present, everything becomes clearer, calmer. They don't command, they inspire. They don't strive to lead, others follow naturally. Do you see yourself in any of these images? You don't choose an archetype like choosing a dish on a menu. The archetype chooses you long before you had the language to recognize it. But you must see it, name it, and begin to fully live it. That is the first step to becoming a symbol, not in a branding sense, but in the soul sense. Because the world doesn't need another person pretending to be someone else. The world needs you in your original, undiluted self. Remember, an archetype is not a role to perform. You don't need to act like a magician or dress like a sovereign. You need to live from where that energy originates. And that energy will naturally shape how you speak, how you walk, how you decide. When you live in alignment with your archetype, the world feels it, not through your words, but through the subtle impact of your presence. But this journey is not for the impatient. Ours often buried beneath the dust of fear of rejection, of being different, of not being accepted. Society doesn't reward authenticity. It rewards conformity. And to conform, you have to cut off parts of yourself that don't fit the mold. But here's the paradox. The parts you cut off are often the parts where your radiance lives. You may be told you're too much, too sensitive, too dreamy, too independent, too quiet, too intense. But here's the truth. Too much in the eyes of others is often just right in the eyes of your soul. Let them say you've changed. Let them fail to understand. Because you weren't born to be easy to understand. You were born to awaken something forgotten in others by simply living your truth. And that is the power of the archetype. When you live in alignment with the symbol within you, you become extraordinary without effort. Your presence becomes a subtle magnet attracting precisely those who are meant to feel your energy. Not everyone will understand you, but those who need to will feel you. They will see you as a mirror reflecting the deepest part of themselves, the part they never dared to face. So take your time. Begin by watching yourself as if reading sacred scripture. Remember the moments you felt most alive, the symbols that keep reappearing throughout your life, from your favorite books to characters you always resonate with. They are traces, clues, callings. And once you have named your archetype, live fully from it. Because from that moment on, you are no longer an option. You are a frequency that cannot be replicated, a symbol others cannot forget because they have never met anyone quite like you. 9. Live as the irreplaceable. If you've ever wondered what happens when someone dares to step out of the comfort zone of their old identity to live fully in their true essence, then let me tell you about Elena. Not as a figure to admire from afar, but as a mirror so you can look into it and whisper, I could be that too. Elena wasn't special in the way society usually defines it. She wasn't famous. She didn't have millions of followers. She was a therapist, skilled, dedicated, meticulous, but nearly invisible in the very world she was serving. Her clients were satisfied with the results, but few remembered her name. Her sessions were effective, polished, and correct, but somehow lacked that something which made people pause and truly feel. She was someone everyone liked, but no one remembered. And like many of us, Elena once believed the problem was skill. She took more courses, refined her process, invested in personal branding, hired photographers to create polished portfolios, and yet the outcome remained the same. Her work was always good enough to be selected, but never deep enough to be seen as irreplaceable. Then one day, everything changed. Not because someone handed her the secret to success, but because she happened to stand in front of a painting. It was during a trip to an art gallery in Prague. Not for work, not for a project, just a short holiday she gifted herself. She wandered through quiet halls, aimless, letting herself drift through beauty. And there, in a corner where few people stopped, she saw a painting of the healer archetype, Asclepius, the embodiment of transformation, medicine, and soulful restoration. In that moment, something inside Elena cracked open, not logically, but viscerally, as if a door long locked in her psyche suddenly swung open, without sound, yet echoing deeply. She stood still for a long time, not because the painting was overwhelmingly beautiful, but because she felt as though she was seeing herself. The forgotten part of her, the undervalued self, the essence that had been boxed into the term therapist. She wasn't merely someone who helped people solve problems to be functionally better. She was someone who awakened soul within healing. She didn't simply provide therapy. She stirred transformation, summoned renewal, evoked unnamed wholeness. And the most important part, Elena had always known this deep down, but had believed it wasn't practical, not marketable, not easy to price. She used to think, who needs soul transformation in therapy? People just want quick solutions and coping strategies. But standing before the healer, she realized that if she didn't live true to this knowing, she would always remain a shadow of herself, always a temporary option, always the affordable service, always the one hired, but never remembered. When she returned, Elena didn't rush to rebrand or raise prices. She began with language. The way she spoke about her work, she changed her introduction. No longer, I'm a therapist, but I create spaces that have the power to heal the soul. She stopped submitting portfolios full of dozens of standard testimonials and instead chose the 3 transformations that moved her most and told the stories behind them in the language of inspiration. Her website no longer used neutral phrases like professional services or affordable rates. Instead, it spoke to the heart. Healing is where your soul remembers itself, not just where your mind finds peace. Her rates went up, not because she demanded it, but because the value she offered had transformed. Clients began to seek her out, not to manage symptoms or achieve quick fixes, but because they wanted to feel seen, understood, and reflected in their healing journey. She no longer competed with the market. She created a new one, where depth and connection were the standard. But the most profound shift wasn't in her income. It was that Elena no longer forgot her name. She remembered her essence. She lived in alignment with her archetype, and when she did, the world responded with reverence. You see, this is not a story about personal branding. It's not a marketing lesson. This is proof of a truth that you've likely felt, even if you haven't yet admitted it to yourself. You were not born to sell services. You were born to transform energy. You are not here to compete. You are here to redefine the standard. And that can only happen when you live in full alignment with who you really are. Not everyone will understand. Some will call you delusional. Some will say you're losing touch with reality. But the truth is, they say these things because they've forgotten a part of their soul that once knew the same light. And they're afraid. Afraid that you'll become living proof of what they've buried. That living authentically is not only possible, it is the most worthy thing. Elena didn't succeed because she tried to be different. She became irreplaceable for one reason only. She dared to remember who she was, and that you can do too. You don't need a trip to Prague. You only need a moment of silence long enough to hear the deepest calling within you. When you recognize that essence, trust it. Begin to live as if you already are that person, because the truth is, you always have been. It's time to gently lay down all the keys we've gathered along this path. From archetype and intentional presence to inner richness, language, symbolism, and silent magnetism, and reflect on a profound truth. Becoming a luxury isn't about turning outward, it's a return inward, a return to the deepest part of you where you no longer seek to be chosen because you have become irreplaceable, where you no longer need to prove anything because your presence alone carries undeniable resonance, where you no longer perform or adjust to fit in, but simply stand as yourself, and that in itself is the rarest treasure. You see, we grow up in a world that teaches us how to become valuable, but not how to become unforgettable. They teach you to be better, faster, smarter, but rarely teach you how to live as a rare symbol, an unrepeatable frequency. And because of that lack of guidance, you once believed that to be seen you had to shine louder. But the truth is, the most valuable things never need to demand attention. They simply exist in full integrity, and the world quietly leans toward them. Becoming a luxury is not a goal. It is the natural outcome of someone who has walked the full journey home to themselves. When you learn to honor your soul, not needing validation, not needing applause, not needing explanation, everything around you begins to shift. You stop looking for your place. You become the place. You no longer compete. You create your own frequency. And you are no longer an option. You are the decision others cannot ignore. But to reach that place, you've walked through a path that wasn't easy. You've shed many layers, not out of rejection, but because you realized they blocked your true light. You chose solitude over attachment, silence over empty conversation, the quiet of a room over the noise of the crowd. Not because you wanted to be apart, but because you were returning. And on that road home, not everyone could walk with you. You learned to listen, not through logic, but through intuition. You learned to protect your energy, not out of selfishness, but because you understood that energy isn't meant to be scattered, but focused into a frequency that's clear, strong, and deeply touching. And you learned to say no, not to push away, but to preserve the sacredness of your presence. When you become a luxury, you no longer need everyone to understand you. Understanding yourself is enough. Those meant to find you will. Those who are not will drift away. But you no longer panic in their absence because you are whole enough that absence doesn't feel like loss. It feels like space for what is truly worthy to enter. You begin to see the world differently. You stop evaluating by surface. You stop asking, what does this person offer me, and start wondering, how does this person resonate with my inner frequency? And from there, you build relationships not from need, but from real, whole resonance between two full souls. Luxury isn't something you try to be. It's what happens when you stop pretending. It's not a spotlight you place on yourself. It's the light within that is finally allowed to shine. Unfiltered, unapproved, unbounded by outdated roles. It's when you no longer try to impress, but others can't look away because you live so truthfully that everything false simply fades. And then you realize a simple truth. You don't need to be chased. You only need to be seen in the right way. And when you've learned to see yourself rightly, you no longer depend on anyone else's gaze. You walk into the world as someone who has come home to their own heart. No crutches, because you are the ground. No open doors, because you are the door through which others enter. Truth. You are no longer the one begging for a place. You are the mountain, not needing anyone below to appear tall, not needing to shout to prove your strength. You simply stand. And those who seek steadiness will come. Those who chase the fleeting will keep running. You do not blame, you do not cling. You simply smile because you know you have come home. So if there is one thing to carry with you after all we've walked through, let it be this. Becoming a luxury is not a destination. It is an invitation to return to the truest, clearest, most real version of you. And when you live from that place, the world no longer sees you as a choice. They see you as a symbol, not because you displayed it, but because you were quiet enough for your light to speak for itself. Walk as if every step you take declares, I do not need to be chosen. I am the irreplaceable. And live as if every breath you take is a frequency whispering, I did not come to be liked. I came to remind you that you too can come home to yourself, just like I have.